At 3:22 in the morning on a Tuesday in late spring, 11 Iranian ballistic missiles crossed into Iraqi airspace, acquired their terminal guidance locks, and impacted Ain al-Assad Air Base in Anbar province over a span of exactly 11 minutes. When the last warhead detonated, 3 hardened aircraft shelters had collapsed. 2 fuel depots were burning with fires that would not be extinguished for 31 hours. A runway extension that had taken 4 years to construct was fractured along a 340-meter section, and the electronic warfare suite housed in the northeastern compound, a system that cost American taxpayers $847 million to develop and install, had been reduced to wreckage by a single precision strike that arrived from a direction the system's sensors were not oriented to cover. The United States military had invested more than $4 billion across 2 decades to make Ain al-Assad one of the most defensively hardened installations in the Middle East. 11 minutes erased the credibility of that investment in ways that no official briefing has yet fully addressed. Subscribe to the channel right now and turn on notifications before going any further, because the pace at which what is documented on the ground is diverging from what official communications are describing means that this analysis cannot be missed when the next development breaks. The gap between the official characterization of what happened at Ain al-Assad and what satellite imagery, independent engineering assessments, and regional intelligence reporting confirm actually occurred is not a minor discrepancy. It is a structural failure in the logic of deterrence that has governed American military presence in the region for 2 decades. That failure has consequences that extend far beyond one base in Anbar province. To understand the full weight of what happened at Ain al-Assad, it is necessary to understand what this installation actually represents within the architecture of American military power projection across the broader Middle East theater, because this was not simply a strike against concrete and steel. It was a demonstration conducted against the most expensive argument that the United States military has made in the region, the argument that enough money, enough technology, and enough defensive layering can make a fixed military installation invulnerable to the missile systems that regional adversaries can deploy. Ain al-Assad covers approximately 23 square kilometers of hardened desert terrain in western Iraq's Anbar province. It operates as a critical logistics hub, serving operations across Iraq, Syria, and the broader Levant corridor. The installation maintains capacity for fixed-wing aircraft operations, rotary-wing forward staging, special operations support, and intelligence collection platforms that feed targeting data across the entire theater. Its runway infrastructure was extended and reinforced between 2019 and 2023 at a cost of $340 million, specifically to accommodate larger surveillance and refueling aircraft that support persistent aerial coverage. The defensive architecture surrounding the installation included Patriot missile batteries, counter-rocket artillery, and mortar systems, hardened command and control bunkers rated to withstand direct impact from conventional munitions, and the electronic warfare suite in the northeastern compound designed to degrade incoming missile guidance systems before terminal descent. Ain al-Assad was, by every metric that American military planners use to assess defensive adequacy, a hardened installation. The $4 billion figure cited across defense appropriations documents over 2 decades represents the cumulative investment in making it so. The missiles that struck it on that Tuesday morning were Fateh II variants, according to preliminary assessments from 3 independent open-source intelligence analysts, whose satellite imagery work has been consistent with subsequent official acknowledgements across multiple previous incidents in this conflict. The Fateh II is a hypersonic glide vehicle delivered by a ballistic missile bus. The distinction matters technically and operationally in ways that the official characterization of the strike as a missile attack does not adequately convey. A conventional ballistic missile follows a predictable arc. Interception systems calculate that arc, position interceptors along the projected descent path, and engage the incoming warhead during terminal descent phase. The mathematics of that engagement sequence have been refined across 40 years of Patriot system development. The system is not infallible, but it is calibrated against the threat it was designed to defeat. The Fateh II does not follow that arc. The ballistic bus delivers a glide vehicle that separates at high altitude and then maneuvers unpredictably during what would be the terminal descent phase of a conventional warhead. The glide vehicle is not decelerating toward a fixed impact point. It is actively maneuvering, adjusting its trajectory based on terminal guidance updates, capable of lateral movements that defeat the geometric assumptions built into Patriot intercept calculations. The engagement window for a Patriot battery attempting to intercept a maneuvering re-entry vehicle of this class is measured not in seconds, but in fractions of seconds, and the intercept probability against a target executing terminal maneuvers drops from the figures cited in standard performance documentation to numbers that American military planners have not publicly disclosed, but that the events at Ain al-Assad now document with operational clarity. According to multiple independent assessments reviewed in preparation for this analysis, the Patriot batteries at Ain al-Assad fired a combined total of 14 interceptors across the 11-minute strike window. The evidence available from post-strike imagery and reporting suggests that none of those 14 interceptors achieved a successful intercept against a maneuvering Fateh II airframe. Some intercepts may have engaged decoys or debris. The 11 missiles that were launched toward the installation appear to have delivered their warheads with a circular error probable, the radius within which 50% of warheads will impact of approximately 8 to 12 meters, based on the distribution pattern visible in satellite imagery of the post-strike installation. That level of precision against a hardened target is not luck. It is the product of terminal guidance architecture that the defensive systems at Ain al-Assad were not engineered to defeat. The electronic warfare suite in the northeastern compound was specifically positioned to degrade exactly this kind of terminal guidance update. The system operates by flooding the electromagnetic spectrum across frequencies used by terminal guidance receivers, creating noise that disrupts the targeting update signals that precision-guided munitions require during final approach. The compound housing that system was struck by a single warhead that impacted at a bearing of 312 degrees northwest. The electronic warfare suite sensor and emitter arrays were oriented primarily across the southern and southeastern approaches, aligned with the threat vectors that dominated American intelligence assessments of Iranian missile capability as of the system's installation in 2021. The single warhead that destroyed it arrived from outside the primary coverage arc of the system it was designed to protect. Whether that approach vector reflected Iranian knowledge of the system's coverage geometry, or whether it reflected a trajectory optimization driven by fuel efficiency and geographic constraints that happened to coincide with a coverage gap, cannot be determined from open-source information alone. The evidence requires acknowledgement, however, that a warhead destroyed a $847 million defensive system by approaching from a direction that system was not configured to cover, and that this outcome was achieved on the first strike against this installation using this weapon system. The operational implication of that convergence is something that American defense planners are currently working through, and the conclusions they reach will shape procurement decisions, basing posture and deterrence doctrine for years beyond this specific conflict. Subscribe to the channel and share this analysis with anyone trying to understand what is actually happening behind the daily headline cycle, because the next phase of what this strike has set in motion is already developing. When the operational assessment of Ain al-Assad's defensive failure produces the procurement and posture adjustments that it inevitably will, when the congressional inquiries into the gap between the $4 billion investment and the 11-minute outcome begin generating classified testimony that eventually surfaces in public reporting, the analysis of what it means will be here. The mechanisms matter more than the headlines. Understanding the mechanisms is the only way to understand what comes next. The economic consequences of what happened at Ain al-Assad extend well beyond the direct cost of the infrastructure that was destroyed, and understanding the specific pathways through which those consequences move into the daily economic reality of ordinary households requires examining three distinct transmission mechanisms that are already operating simultaneously. The first mechanism is direct replacement cost. The hardened aircraft shelters that collapsed represent structures that require specialized construction techniques, reinforced concrete formulations, and blast door systems that are not available from standard military construction contractors. Replacement cost for a single hardened aircraft shelter of the type destroyed at Ain al-Assad runs between $45 million and $70 million, depending on the protection rating and internal systems integration required. Three shelters represent a replacement liability of between $135 million and $210, run between $45 million and $210, run between $45 million, run between $45 million, run between $45 million, May Queen $45 million, run between $45 million, May Queen $45 million, run between $45 million, run between $45 million, May Queen $45 million, run between $45 million, May Queen $45 million, run between $45 million, run between $40 million before accounting for the internal systems and aircraft support equipment destroyed when the structures collapsed. The runway fracture along the 340-meter section requires removal and replacement of the reinforced concrete foundation, not surface patching, because the fracture pattern visible in post-strike imagery indicates subsurface pressure wave damage to the compacted base layer beneath the surface concrete. Full restoration of that runway section to operational specification is an estimated 14 to 18-month project at a cost of approximately $180 million. The northeastern compound housing the destroyed electronic warfare suite will require complete reconstruction and system replacement at a cost that defense budget documents from comparable installations suggest will exceed $1 billion when accounting for the current generation replacement system rather than reinstallation of the previous system that was destroyed. Total direct replacement cost for the physical damage at Ain al-Assad, based on these figures, runs between $1.4 billion and $1.6 billion before any accounting for operational disruption costs. The second mechanism is insurance and shipping market response. The strike at Ain al-Assad has already produced measurable movement in war risk insurance premiums for commercial shipping operating across Gulf routes and through the Strait of Hormuz. According to shipping industry data published in the days following the strike, war risk insurance premiums for vessels transiting Gulf waters have increased by between 340 and 480% above baseline rates established before this conflict escalated to its current level. That premium increase is not paid by shipping companies as an abstract financial cost. It is passed through to the cost of every barrel of oil, every container of manufactured goods, and every ton of agricultural commodities that moves through these routes. The actuarial mathematics of war risk insurance translate directly into consumer prices at a lag of approximately 6 to 10 weeks, which means that the price movement that the Ain al-Assad strike will produce in gas station prices and grocery store shelves has not yet fully materialized as of this analysis. The weekly cost of the elevated premium structure distributed across the volume of commerce transiting affected routes runs to approximately $3 billion per week in aggregate additional cost to the global supply chain. That figure will not appear on anyone's household budget as a line item, but it will appear as the cumulative effect of small price increases across dozens of categories that the target demographic of this channel buys every week. The third mechanism is energy market response, which represents the most direct pathway between what happened at a military installation in Anbar province and what families in Ohio and Yorkshire pay to heat their homes and fill their vehicles. al-Assad's operational degradation, combined with the broader escalation signaled by the strike, has contributed to a risk premium in crude oil pricing that energy market analysts are currently estimating at between $8 and $14 per barrel, above where prices would otherwise be trading given current supply and demand fundamentals. At the retail level, a sustained $10 per barrel risk premium in crude pricing translates to approximately 22 to 26 cents per gallon of additional cost at the pump in American markets, with comparable proportional increases across European markets. For a household driving 2 vehicles and filling up twice a week, that translates to between $18 and $24 per week in additional fuel costs, compounded across a year if the risk premium sustains, which energy market analysts say depends entirely on whether the conflict escalates further or de-escalates toward a negotiated framework. That figure reaches between $936 and $1.248 in additional annual fuel costs for a typical 2-vehicle American household. That is not an abstraction. That is a car payment, a month of groceries, or a significant portion of a utility bill for the kind of family that this conflict's architects will never personally encounter. The strategic question that assembles all of these elements into a single frame is the one that defense analysts across the ideological spectrum are now asking with urgency that official communications have not yet matched. The question is not whether Ain al-Assad can be repaired or whether the Patriot batteries there can be upgraded or supplemented. Those are procurement questions with answers that defense contractors will be delighted to provide. The question is whether the fundamental logic of fixed, hardened, expensive military installations as the primary expression of American military presence and power projection in the Middle East remains viable against the missile systems that Iran has now demonstrated it can deploy with the precision and penetration capability documented at Ain al-Assad. The $4 billion investment in Ain al-Assad was not irrational when it was made. It was calibrated against a threat environment that existed at a specific point in time, against missile systems with specific accuracy limitations, against guidance technologies that American electronic warfare systems were designed to defeat. The Fatah II and its successor systems represent a capability development trajectory that has outpaced the defensive architecture that was built against earlier points on that trajectory. That is not a failure of American military engineering. It is the normal dynamic of offensive and defensive capability competition. What the events at Ain al-Assad document is a specific moment in that competition where the offense has achieved a demonstrable advantage over the defense that has not yet been closed by a corresponding defensive capability development. Multiple independent analysts confirm that this moment has implications that extend far beyond the specific installation that was struck. There are currently 14 American military installations across the Middle East that represent fixed, hardened infrastructure investments comparable in scale and strategic function to Ain al-Assad. Every one of those installations is now subject to the same fundamental question that the events of that Tuesday morning raised. Does the defensive architecture protecting this installation remain adequate against the missile systems that adversaries in this theater can now deploy? The honest answer to that question, based on what the Ain al-Assad strike documented, is that the answer is not known with the confidence that the billions of dollars invested in those installations' defenses were intended to provide. The broader strategic consequence of that uncertainty is a revision of the deterrence calculus that has governed American military posture in the region since the Gulf War established the template of overwhelming American conventional superiority as the foundational assumption of that calculus. Deterrence works when the adversary believes that a military action will produce consequences that outweigh its benefits. The deterrence architecture around American installations in the Middle East has rested partly on the assumption that those installations could not be struck with sufficient precision and penetration capability to achieve meaningful military effect at acceptable cost to the attacker. The 11-minute operational record at Ain al-Assad has complicated that assumption in ways that will require either a demonstration of restored defensive superiority or an adjustment of the posture that the assumption was supporting. Neither response is quick or cheap, and neither response can be achieved through a press briefing or an official characterization that does not match what the satellite imagery shows. Here is where the complete operational picture stands in the wake of what happened in Anbar province on that Tuesday morning. 11 Iranian ballistic missiles, assessed as Fatah-2 maneuvering re-entry vehicles, struck Ain al-Assad airbase over 11 minutes. 14 Patriot interceptors were fired. The documented impact pattern suggests 0 successful intercepts against maneuvering warheads. 3 hardened aircraft shelters collapsed. 2 fuel depots burned for 31 hours. A 340-meter runway section requires full reconstruction at an estimated cost of $180 million and a projected timeline of 14 to 18 months. The $847 million electronic warfare system in the northeastern compound was destroyed by a single warhead approaching from outside its primary coverage arc. Total direct replacement cost is estimated between $1.4 billion and $1.6 billion. War risk insurance premiums for Gulf shipping have increased between 340 and 480%. The crude oil risk premium attributable to this escalation is currently estimated at $8 to $14 per barrel. The weekly cost of supply chain disruption flowing from elevated insurance premiums runs approximately $2.3 billion across global commerce. A typical 2-vehicle American household will pay between $18 and $24 per week in additional fuel costs if the risk premium sustains, translating to between $936 and $1.248 in additional annual expenditure. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. When the congressional oversight process produces the first classified assessment of Ain al-Assad's defensive failure that surfaces in public reporting, when the Pentagon's formal capability review generates the procurement response that will define the next generation of American basing posture in the Middle East, when the insurance market movement produces the retail price adjustments that will make this conflict's economic cost visible to every household filling a gas tank, the analysis will be here. Evidence first. What it means for you, always. Leave one question in the comments before continuing on to anything else today. The question worth sitting with is this one. If $4 billion in defensive investment and 14 fired interceptors could not stop 11 missiles from achieving their intended effect at Ain al-Assad, can the architecture of fixed military presence that the United States has built across the Middle East over 2 decades keep pace with the offensive capability development that this conflict is documenting in real time, or is what was tested at Ain al-Assad on that Tuesday morning a demonstration that the strategic assumptions underneath that architecture are no longer sound? Every response gets read. This is the analysis that evidence requires.